Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got special guest Todd Evans back to the show. How are you, Todd?
Good, thanks. How you doing, Peter?
Doing pretty well, doing pretty well. Today we are going to talk about Gary Numan, and we are going to discuss two of Gary's albums, Gary Numan and the Tubeway Army, Replicas from 1979. There it is, the album. And the other one, where I'll put a slide up, is Gary Numan solo from 1979, The Pleasure Principle. So Gary Numan came probably to everyone's consciousness in 1978. For maybe about 3 or 4 years, he was absolutely huge in the UK.
Okay.
He had 3 consecutive album number one. In the States, there was a particular song called Cars that went to number 9, and there was a little bit of awareness of Gary Numan. But after that, I think there was not much in the chart action in regards to the States. He started to have a bit of a slump in the 80s, but in the late 90s and the early 2000s, he's had a bit of a mini career resurrection when you have people like Trent Reznor, Depeche Mode, that was citing Gary Numan as being very influential, and he's sort of got this revered status as maybe the godfather of industrial rock, post-punk, etc., etc. So, Todd, I'll throw it to you. What was your first impressions of Gary Numan, your first encounter with Gary Numan as the artist?
Well, in Gary Numan, as far as somebody like me who lives in the States, me and my friends were into just about anything that was new wave punk or post-punk. And so this was when I was 9th grade going into 10th and 10th grade going into 11th. And so we heard Gary Numan because we used to go to local record stores, and if we saw something that I had a friend, I've mentioned it before on shows, his name was Kent. He had more disposable income than I did. So if we saw something cool, he usually bought it. And so we would buy things just because they looked cool. And we may have heard one of the songs from Replicas on the college radio station in Atlanta. And that may have been what prompted my friend to buy it. But that album cover of Replicas is definitely something that someone like me and someone like my weird friends would see and go, "Oh, we have to have this." Yeah. And I've sort of got this reputation of being somebody who really, really enjoys music that has a lot of keyboards and synths in it. And so obviously this was right up my alley then and now. And one of the things that's really cool about Gary Numan is at the time, there was a drum machine really sounded like a drum machine. And so right then around the turn of the decade was where drum machines actually started to fool you. Like you could program drums, and I remember hearing one of the songs on the Human League Dare album, where that was the first time I went, wow, that really sounds like a drum. And you listen to it now, I think it's the song Open Your Heart. You listen to it now and you think that doesn't sound like a real snare drum. But at the time, that technology was moving really quickly. But one of the cool things about Gary Numan is that he used a real drum kit. So they were a real band. So it wasn't like, we liked Kraftwerk too, but it wasn't like Kraftwerk. There was a traditional rock foundation there, and then the synths on top of that. And there were a lot of bands that were doing that at the time. There was Split Enz from Australia, and there was also New Music, which is a band that I absolutely adore. You would listen to it and you would think, oh, well, that's electronic music, that's a drum machine, but it's actually not. It's a drummer playing very much like a metronome, sounding like electronic music. And so that's one of the things that Gary Numan had going for him. And he also had great videos, and we could see, at least a few at the time performances where he would be on a show, with, either lip syncing or playing a song. And there were opportunities to see him on the television. And he always had, that band during that time, 79, 80, 81, they always had a uniform, they would always dress the part to match whatever album they were performing songs from. And those two albums, they're Replicas and the Pleasure Principle are different from each other, and we'll talk about that. But they also kind of go together in my mind.
Absolutely.
So me and my friends, we absolutely adored Gary Numan, and we thought he was the coolest thing ever. And the whole idea of him talking about sci-fi stuff and I'm a robot, it being like almost like an automaton. It's like, and the way he's photographed, we thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so I really looked up to him. I thought he was just the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think these two albums, I'm going to go ahead. I usually put my summation at the end of it, a kind of genius. And
yeah, you too.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to be enthusiastic here. I think they're groundbreaking. And I've been playing, look, they're in heavy rotation in my household, but I've been playing it a lot in preparation for this show. They sound timeless, Todd. They do now. It sounds like he created a sound that in 2023 is absolutely spot on. And even lyrically, the topics that he's talking about, cloning, AI, replicas, read the press. This is life in 2023.
Yeah.
It's like a Nostradamus. It's like he's written a document that, is going to happen in 40 and 50 years' time. So it's amazing. So, okay, why don't we, Todd, talk about Replicas? So this is the album that came out in 1979. So it went to number 1 in the UK and 124 in US. So he was a bit of a cult artist. It didn't break the US charts. So how about we spotlight some songs on this album? What's the first song you'd like to spotlight?
Okay. Well, I've always really liked Down in the Park. I kind of feel like Down in the Park is almost a prog rock song. The atmospheric qualities of it. There's a fantastic Foo Fighters cover of Down in the Park. And so I've really liked that. It's funny that Gary Numan had a signature keyboard sound. He had a signature synth sound, and it wasn't like anybody else's. It was, and I've read that he even used there was like specific presets that he used, but to me, I never heard anybody make those sounds quite like he did. And so there's an eerie quality to the synth sounds but they feel like they're his. But one of the cool things I think about Replicas and comparing these two albums is that Replicas has guitar on it, and Pleasure Principle doesn't. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about the Pleasure Principle. But the albums don't seem that much different from each other. Like You Are in My Vision has guitars in it, and it's a little bit heavier, I guess. I'm not sure if heavier is the right word. And It Must Have Been Years is kind of that way too. But there are other songs. When the Machines Rock almost sort of sounds a little bit like Cars, which is going to come later.
Yes.
Yes. But great drum sound. We'll talk more about drums also when we talk about the next album, because I particularly like the drummer on that album. But the way that both of these albums are mixed, they're mixed really well, and they don't sound, like you said before, they don't sound dated
Not at all.
Not at all. And I also like the Mockman a lot. I like there's kind of it's got kind of a groove to it that I really enjoy. But the wordplay too. I think that we thought it was so, when I was, a young person, I thought it was so cool that he had a song called Me, I Disconnect From You. And what he's saying in it is basically, what would you do? me, I disconnect from you, but he doesn't say it like that with a pause. He just says, me, I disconnect from you. And so
Yeah.
it's almost, slightly not human. And
Yeah.
just the humor in the song titles are Friends Electric and I Nearly Married a Human and When the Machines Rock. And it's just so much fun. And for a 10th grader like me, I guess that would have been put me 14, 15 years old. I just ate that up. I just love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. I'll talk about Down in the Park. So, folks, I would recommend a movie called Art, Not a Music War, which came out in the early 80s. I don't know if you ever saw that, Todd.
I have, but it's been a very long time.
Oh, yeah. And it was basically all these new wave acts in the day doing one song, and it's sort of top and tail with the Police, and you've got bands like the Cramps, Devo, whether they're punk or new wave. And one of the showstopper performances is Down in the Park, and it really, in my view, it sort of steals the show. But I love this song. It's spare, it's minimalist, because Gary Numan doesn't do intricate type of synth lines. They're very minimalist, but it gets in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
All these, and it's a lot of melodies that kind of, they're rolling melodies. They go back and forth, they oscillate, but they're just so memorable. And that's why he's been one of the most sampled artists in history. A lot of hip hop samples Gary Numan. A lot of dance music samples Gary Numan. It's a great melody. I did some research on the lyrics. The lyrics, according to Gary Numan, was about machines in a park that kill humans, and it's like a spectator sport, a la Gladiator, and it's embracing and both fearing technology. So he's written this little science fiction story set in the future, and I thought that was quite interesting. But you've got this spare and minimalist type of eerie, haunting type of song, but the lyrics are very nihilistic and very dark. And a lot of these songs are based on short little stories that he wrote, science fiction stories. So I think it's an absolute brilliant song. The other one I'll throw to you, I don't know if you selected this one, is Are Friends Electric? Did you have this as a spotlight song? Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I just think that this is just the way the keyboards are in this song. They're almost robotic. They almost kind of, there are sounds in this song that almost kind of beep. And, I hate to say that I didn't really do I didn't really dig into the lyrics deep in this song because it's so much a part of me. The song "Our Friends Are Electric" is something that I'm so familiar with that I just take it for what it is. And I think that is I think that the first song sounds really good, but I think Our Friends Electric sonically just sounds like $1 million. I just absolutely love it. I love the way it's mixed. I love the drum sound. I love the sound of the bass. And those keyboards are at the time, I had never heard anything like that before.
Yeah, they're mini Moog. They're mini Moog, poly Moog synth melodies. So he's using a variety of what people would regard now as old school keyboards, but it's sort of timeless. And isn't it funny, his vocals, he's got this disaffected vocals, but it matches the material. It's kind of, you listen to his vocal inflections and the way he sings, and you think that's not a human. That's kind of alien, but at the same time, it matches the material perfectly.
Yeah, there isn't anybody that sings like him. And it's funny, sometimes you get a vocalist like that you sort of feel like is doing a voice. Like I always feel that way about about Billy Corgan. I always think, well, he's got a cool voice, but he's doing a voice. Like if you spoke to him, he wouldn't sound like that. Or if he sang a song straight, he wouldn't sound like that. And I think Gary Numan's doing the same thing. But for some reason, when Gary Numan sings in that voice, it's almost kind of like a nasally kind of a thing. But when he does it, it's so endearing. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, when I first heard it, I was like, haha, he sounds like he's not human. And I just thought that was hilarious.
It just matches it perfectly. That bit where he does
Right.
the vocal bit where he goes, "So now I'm alone. Now I can think for myself." Very bad imitation, folks. Sorry. Yep.
I just love that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The flanger guitar lines that love it.
Yeah, me too.
Melody. So if you saw it written, the melodies are so simple, and you've only got really, it's very, as I said, very spare, very sparse, but it just works perfectly. And that's all his songs. Very simple melodies, but it just works brilliantly.
And I made a parallel to prog rock, and it's not like prog rock because it's not complicated, it's simple. But the direction that things go in, you feel like all the songs go somewhere. And like once you hear them, you learn them and you can remember them. Everything is so memorable, and nothing just sits there, nothing, dies or loses energy. It's just just so well done. And the amazing thing too about him is if you listen to the Two Boy Army album that came before this, he really came out of the gate fully formed. I mean, this album, he sounds like he's really, refined his sound, but he had it from the start.
Yes.
And it's truly original. It's not like anything else anyone else has done.
Yeah, absolutely. So who are his influences? You'd have to say David Bowie. And Bowie didn't like him at all.
Really?
There's been absolutely some interviews, and he was quite disparaging.
To be like him?
Well, I think Bowie may have been sort of threatened because Numan was quite big for a very short space of time. I think in later years that Bowie sort of may have reassessed his views, but at the time, I think he was quite disparaging. He was definitely influenced by Kraftwerk, the Man Machine album. That's what I was just going to say. So Kraftwerk was the kings of doing minimalist synth. I mean, they basically invented synth rock or synth pop. Every band in the early 80s, whether it's new wave or new romantic, arches back to Kraftwerk without a doubt. So you can definitely see there's a lot of Kraftwerk in. And John Fox from Ultravox, Gary Numan is on record to say that the first couple of Ultravox albums were like my Bible. I wouldn't have been who I am without John Fox, Ultravox. And even some of the members of Ultravox had played on it, like Billy Currie has played on
you hear
Gary
that on
Numan.
the next album too. You hear even amid your Ultravox influence.
Absolutely. But he was reviled. The critics just thought he was just an imitation of Bowie. They used to poke fun at him, and they were probably responsible for the demise, which we'll talk about as we go deeper into the show. But he was a very polarizing character. I think a lot of it was also in his interviews because he is on record that he has Asperger's syndrome. And he is a different character, and he would say a lot of things that were not following the cookie cutter path of what a rock star would respond to. It would come across as being very ultra confident, and then I think that got up the noses of a lot of the Fleet Street press and why the critics brought him down, but probably not realizing.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
I was going to say current day Gary Numan is a very interesting follow on social media. He's very down to earth. He talks about his family a lot, and
he's
shows
changed
pictures of his home and his kids, and he's very down to earth now. Yeah,
absolutely. But our Friends Electric, that's one of my top 5 Gary Numan songs. It's been sampled to the nth degree. The lyrics come from another short story that he wrote, and it was about he wrote a story about what London would be in 30 years in the future, and what would friends, in inverted commas, would come to his house to supply services. whether they apply, he said, whether they're prostitutes or whether they're servicemen or appliance. It's just like a futuristic type of story.
Yeah.
So that was the big one that hooked everyone in Australia on the video shows. And it was all based on that sort of image, you know, the peroxide hair and that sort of disaffected look where his eyes would be looking in a different direction, you know?
Yeah, I think that was the first song that me and my friends heard. I think Our Friends Electric was the first one.
Yep. Are there any other songs on this album that you'd like to spotlight?
I really like the song Replicas. It's kind of slow and brooding and I like that one. I mean, I don't have a lot to say about it, but it's just got a great groove to it, and it's just the album is sequenced really well.
I think I agree with you, and I put for Replicas Doom. I think it's really doomy. It's got this doomy synthwave, and synthwave is the genre at the moment. It is the hot genre at the moment where all the kids are getting into, Todd. They love it, and Gary Numan is fresh. This is the sound of now.
One of the things that I wanted to mention is since we were talking about, comparisons to David Bowie, a lot of the music like this from this time. I mean, I just think about what I was listening to at the time, and I think of Split Enz, and I've mentioned New Music. One of the things that those two bands have in common is that they have kind of an earnest vocal. Like they kind of, the vocal seems kind of sincere. Mm-hmm. Gary Numan, in his own cold, maybe I'm not human kind of way, is really kind of doing the same thing. It's just skewed a little bit. You feel like he's a real guy, even though he's talking about a whole bunch of weird stuff.
Yes, absolutely. I think the other song I know you mentioned it, but I'll focus on it is Me, I Disconnect From You. I like the lyric, I couldn't recognize my photograph. Me, I disconnect from you. I love it. It's got that beautiful synth line, pulsating bass, swirling guitar. And it's about loneliness and alienation. So he's a savvy songwriter. His lyrics are not, there's a lot of depth. And I think that it's the perfect merger between sound and vision, lyrics, and it makes it timeless music. So this album didn't have much impact in the States in the day, not until Pleasure Principle. Would that be fair to say, Todd?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we were definitely outliers on it. Most people didn't know who he was until Cars came out.
Yeah. These two albums tick over. I go to the record store. They're always got reissues in vinyl. Would that be the same in your travels when you go to the record stores? You always see it never goes out of print, these two albums.
Yeah, but I always find the original copies. I mean, this is a whole other show. I have purchased, records and purged records and repurchased records a couple of times, but I have never had trouble finding these two records. So people bought them, apparently.
Yeah.
In the States, and I'm talking about US copies too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it ticks over. All right, well, let's talk about the Pleasure Principle, which is the screen behind me. So he's changed his image. So he's got the suit, he's dyed the hair. So he's not looking so alien, worldly, but he's still got that sort of, not quite human, still got that sort of outer worldly type of appearance. And the big hit on this album, Heads and Shoulders, was Cars. So tell us about your views on this song.
Well, I never get tired of this song, and I probably like it more and more as the years go by. At the time, it absolutely blew me away. And one of the things I loved about it was in the video for Cars, he's like standing and he's like moving along the keyboard, and it's a polymoog. And there's no internet at this time, so I knew what a polymoog was, but I'd never seen one. And I remember being really excited about seeing it. I was like, "Oh, that's a polymoog!" And Well, first of all, there's something that I want to say about this album, and it kind of goes along with if I'm going to talk about Cars. There was different personnel on this album. It still had Paul Gardner on the bass and Gary Numan. Gary Numan doesn't play guitar on this album, but they added a drummer, and his name was Cedric Sharpley. And I just absolutely love that guy. I thought the drums on Replicas were good, but the drums on this album are just fantastic. He's just a great drummer. And I remember watching videos, and there are I think there's a photograph of Cedric Sharpley on the sleeve of Telecon, which is the next record. But he had like tight curly hair, and he didn't look like a rock star. And he had this thing where I think he chewed gum, so he was he would kind of move his head around like this. Man, I love that guy. And to me, that's one of the best things I like about Cars. I could listen to the drum track of Cars just on a loop.
Yeah.
I just love the way it sounds. Great lyric. Another thing I want to say about this album is that, because I don't want to forget to say this, I love one-word song titles. I absolutely love one-word song titles. That's my big complaint whenever I see, one of the things that I notice when I see a long song title, I think, cut that down. Pick the important 1, 2, or 3 words. I mean, I just love the way it goes. Airlane, Metal, Complex, Films, ME, Tracks, Observer. And, they almost sound like, the songs almost sound like the word. I mean, Metal almost sounds like metal. And so, and Cars, it's perfect. Because it goes Tracks, Observer, Conversation, Cars, Engineers. And that tells you a lot about the song before you even hear it.
Yes, you're spot on. It suits the material, that it's robotic, it's science fiction, it's straight to the point. And it's not like a Meatloaf esque type of song title that is like verbal diarrhea.
Which I don't care for. I sometimes, if I see a song that's got a really long title, I will edit it in my head to something shorter.
yeah, absolutely. No, it fits the material perfectly. I love the lyrics of Car, where it's talking about how he feels safe, technology wise, to be in his car. And the story behind this was, when he broke big in the UK, he was attacked in the streets because he was out there. And you had a lot of, because of the peroxide hair, and there was maybe a lot of hate, perpetrated in the press or whatever. And he was, there was a certain number of folk in the community that really despised him. And there was an incident where he was chased in the street and he had to lock himself in his car. And this is where this song came from. So an incident of despair became one of his biggest hits. But it's just so infectious. And I was looking for my daughter's Casio tone keyboard, and I was going to bring it out and just do that little synth line because I play a little bit of keyboards, and I love because they're quite simple, but they're so effective. It's like earworm.
And and there's that sound that the song starts with, and it sort of goes all the way to the song where it's like wah, 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 wah.
Yeah,
and it just kind of goes to the whole
flanging.
Thing. And it's perfect for that song.
This album's got so much flanging, reverb, phasing. It's just got every trick in the book.
I'm a huge fan of the flanger.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I think we both agree this is probably top 5 Gary Numan Cars.
Yes, for sure.
What's another track you'd like to focus on?
Well, I wanted to talk about the first song. I wanted to talk about Airlane because it's kind of unique to start with an instrumental. Yes. And then going into Metal, the song Metal to me is the one on this album that sounds the most like the album before. Even though it doesn't have any guitars in it, it has a kind of a Replicas feel to it. So I always kind of put those together. So I think that's a great way to start the album. And I think, again, Cedric Sharpley, he's just great.
Oh, I think it adds another dimension to it. And it's very brave because so he had guitars and then he went to synth, but he still adds some real instrumentation to add texture. And it just...
You almost have to be told that there's no guitars on this album because it doesn't feel that different from Replicas.
Correct. And it's just because it was using synth sounds to sound like guitars with the the flanges, the reverb, etc. But Metal, what a song. That is so good. And I love the concept of the lyrics about an android who realizes he's actually an android. He's not human.
Yeah.
So is this going to be something in 100 years' time when we're long gone, Todd? This
I don't know.
people, they will be looking at this album and go, how did they know this was going to happen?
Yeah.
The topic of AI is just, I don't know if it's prevalent in the States, but there's a lot of topics, a lot of social commentary about AI at the moment.
There is. That's the same here too. Yeah.
And this album sort of predicts it, where, Gary was just saying that he used to ferociously read science fiction novels like by Isaac Asimov or Philip K. Dick. And that's what a lot of these stories and lyrics come from. But I love Metal. I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful song. Any other songs you'd like to pick off on this one?
I've always, back when it came out, I really loved Tracks, because Tracks starts out with just the piano. And it's you almost think it's going to be a very different kind of a song for him. And it kind of is. And it's very beautiful, but it sort of morphs into sounding like a Gary Numan song the further along it goes. I always liked that song. I always thought it was great that he started side 2 with something like that starts kind of atmospheric rather than something that, has a really big punch to it at the beginning. And I just think that it's beautiful. I like that it's short. I think it's just the perfect length for a song like that. And I love that song. I've always loved Tracks. I used to think that Tracks was my favorite song in the album, but I think it's probably either Cars or Metal. But it's hard to pick a favorite.
Absolutely.
And then I also wanted to mention Complex, because that's the one that has the violin. I don't know whether it has violin and viola or one or the other.
Yeah.
But it's that's the one that gives me the Ultravox vibes.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to put films. I don't like the film, Play or Back. Somebody wrote that this song directly influenced US hip hop, because hip hop have sampled a lot of their breaks off this song. I found that interesting. And Cedric Sharpley is probably one of the MVPs of this whole Gary Numan story. And I tend to agree.
I think so too. I thought I was the only person who thought that way. So I'm glad to hear that from you.
Absolutely. But can you sort of hear the breaks on that particular track? I get it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
There's a lineage.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think it's a great album. So I'll put a question to you. Why didn't he maintain the momentum after Cars? He's regarded as a one-hit wonder in the States. Well, is it because he was a bit too weird?
If you don't mind me going further on to the next couple of albums, I think that he's straight. There was almost... I hate to use the word formula because I don't want to make it sound like I'm slighting the material and what he was doing, but he strayed from it a lot.
There's a lot.
And so I have to be honest with you. I didn't go very far. I mean, I've heard things here and there, but I didn't go very far past I Assassin. I Assassin is where I started to lose interest a little bit. Not because he wasn't a great artist and not because he couldn't still write songs and not that he wasn't innovating. It was just... I loved the sound of the band so much during this period that I felt like once you get to Dance and I Assassin, there's some of that, but there's also some more experimental stuff. And there was so much happening in my life at that time. At that time, I was discovering Rush and I was discovering Yes and Supertramp and stuff like that. And all of this was happening all at the same time. And I really want it to be one of my retirement projects, to really go album by album for Gary Numan all the way through the later period and find out what I missed. But that's what I feel like happened to him. And I don't necessarily think that there was anything that could have the kind of traction that Cars had in the next, 4 or 5 albums. Now, I think Telecon is great. And I remember Telecon, the album that comes directly after Pleasure Principle. I remember I Die, You Die was on the American version of Telecon and that getting some airplay. And I remember that between when Pleasure Principle and Telecon came out, they had that Living Ornaments album, the live album. And there were parts of that. There was video from that album that they sort of turned into videos and showed on TV, like, on late night music shows. And but I feel like I'm not really sure why Telecon wasn't bigger than Pleasure Principle, because even though I think Pleasure Principle is kind of a perfect moment in time, I think Telecon is very good.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem to get the traction.
It didn't. Like We Are Glass didn't really sort of trouble the charts or airplay in America, because that was, I think, he's another major hit in the UK. Didn't really sort of transpose across. So Gary Numan, as I said earlier, wasn't a critic's darling, and there was a bit of a backlash. So for a couple of years, he was like right at the top, and I guess, he may have been his worst enemy, a lot of those press interviews where he came across as arrogance. He was very rich. A lot of his hobbies were flying aeroplanes, and he was sort of regarded as maybe a snotty, rich rocker. And there was a bit of a downward spiral in the late 80s. He could barely get arrested. And
it's hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine somebody being upset by listening to something that he would say, because I would think that you would expect him to give odd answers to questions. You know what I mean? If I was going to interview Gary Numan in 1981 or 80, I would expect it to be weird,
Yeah.
And I think it kind of got misconstrued as arrogance. I don't really think that that's what it was.
Yeah. But I think the David Bowie Light, Lite, was the most common moniker that was thrown his way, and it's very unfair. Yes, there's similarities, but he was a groundbreaker, and he was focusing on, like, he would be influenced by your Ultravox and Kraftwerk, but he would be turning into something like a subgenre of his own. His lyrics are very nihilistic. You look at the lyrics of how he's completely different to David Bowie. David Bowie, a lot of the Ziggy Stardust era, is very traditional rock and roll.
Well, it makes me wonder if people just made the mistake of just looking at him and just making a judgment just based on looking at him. Because Gary Numan and as vocalists, they couldn't be more different.
Yes,
I mean,
but
like you said, the rock and roll thing, and there's almost kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like a with Bowie, there's kind of like this gentleman thing happening, and with Gary Numan, it's like this alien robot thing happening. Yeah, it's very different.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, Bowie in 83 really had to change his look and become very commercial to finally break it through in America, because even Bowie was regarded as a cult artist. I mean, he had albums that hit the top 10. He had songs that hit the top 10. But if you look at the album sales, none of them were like mega platinum, multi-selling albums, which was quite surprising. I mean, he didn't really conquer the Midwest. He had to really change his image and change his sound to be more MTV friendly. And that's why, Let's Dance was I think it was his only number one album in America, or a number one song in America.
And it's weird for somebody like me. I have to admit to something right now. For somebody like me, I was around when, Golden Years and Fame and Young Americans, when those songs were hits, and they were big hits. I heard them all the time when I was a kid, in like middle school. David Bowie was on the radio all the time. But when you go back and as an adult and go, I'm going to listen to those albums rather than just the songs, rather than listen to changes, the compilation. I'm going to listen to those albums. And when you listen to those albums, you find that they're not like you thought they were. There's all kinds of different things happening. And when I went back and listened to David Bowie's catalog, I was like, wow, this stuff is really interesting. He's doing all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
And I always was I was happy to see him break through. I know we're getting off subject a little here, but I was happy to see Bowie break through in the States. But, I kind of felt like, when that Scary Monsters album was like him at his best. But I feel like comparisons between him and Gary Numan are just way off base.
Yeah.
Just because he's a man who wears a suit and has short hair.
But that was definitely a common slur. But I think the comparison from careers was Bowie was able to shift a gear and maybe sell out a little bit commercially to break through America. I think that you look at Gary Numan and that image behind me, I don't think that's going to conquer the Midwest without changing gears. And that's why he was put in that pudge.
Yeah, David Bowie with a tan standing next to Tina Turner. That'll do it.
Yes. But if Gary Numan came out in the era of grunge in the 90s, and you had a lot of people, that's where there was all these different, it was a fertile ground for new genres of music, electronica, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. It could have been a whole different story. He may have broken huge in America. So he had a bit of a second wind of his career, but more as an influencer. And he was just cited by Trent Reznor, I think Billy Corgan, Depeche Mode had cited like Violator, we're influenced by Gary Numan. And he had a bit of a resurrection, but not at that sort of mega success. But he was able to, I think he relocated, he lives in LA, and he was able to have a bit of a touring career playing the various venues around America. So I actually saw him
it's just a matter of bad timing.
Because it all comes down to timing, doesn't it?
Yeah, because he's capable of making, and he has made much heavier music than The Pleasure Principle. And much more guitar-oriented music, things that sound more like Trent Reznor. And he can do that, and he has done that. Yeah. But I just don't think he did the right thing at the right time. And that's certainly not his fault.
Yeah. I don't like it as much as the early stuff. As I said,
I don't either.
I have to say these two albums are genius, and I don't like his industrial material as much. I did see him about 10 years ago, and I was quite disappointed. They played a lot of the material from The Pleasure Principle and Replicas, but they played it very heavy-handed, and they played it through a prism or through a filter of industrial rock. So Cars, which I'm used to in a certain way sonically, they played it like a heavy metal Sledgehammer version. I was very disappointed. He looked different. He had the peroxide hair hat on. He had the dark hair hat. He looks completely different. He was wearing the bondage gear. He's just sort of reinvented himself, probably because his people that he's influenced and the style of music that they play, he's looked at them and said, okay, well, maybe instead of being the influencer, I'll be the influenced. He's changed roles, where I think he should go back and maybe revisit some of the sounds of 79 and 80, which are just so futuristic and so relevant and so current to this day. What do you think about what I just said? Does that make a lot of sense? Or
it does. I feel like there are, I could be wrong about this, and people can tell us in the comments if I'm wrong about this, but I don't think Gary Numan has done any nostalgia tours. I don't think that he's done, or at least he hasn't done as many as, say, a band like ABC, where Martin Fry has come out, who I absolutely adore, has come out and basically just said, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with coming on after Culture Club. It's fine with me. Gary Numan has not wanted to do that. So everybody, manages their own image the way they want to manage it. And I think that he would rather try to surprise us rather than give us exactly what we want.
Yeah, look, those golden hits and memories tours, I find are a little bit naff. And you've got a
Same
lot of
here.
bands in the 80s that have retained their careers because they don't go down that route. Like bands like
Right.
Tears for Fears, Duran,
I was just going to say
Depeche
that.
Mode. They've never done that because they put out an album, they tour in their own right, and they get a supporter base. But if you're just going into these nostalgia shows and you're doing 3 tracks and you're off, then it's very hard to convey to the audience that you've got you're still an actively recording, prosperous band. I've seen a lot of these shows. They're fun, but they're sort of like, right. I don't know, artistically, are they rewarding?
I don't like to see bands that I think deserve better end up settling for that. I was thrilled when Spandau Ballet reformed about 10 years ago and actually went on tours where they headlined. I was so happy that they weren't just coming on after Berlin, in a multi act tour. And but Tony Hadley, he does that.
Yes,
the lead singer of Spandau Ballet. He's like, I'm good with that. I'm good with being come watch me play 3 hits and then watch somebody else play 3 hits. But I don't care for it.
Yeah, look,
I've seen ABC do a full-length headlining concert in the last 11, 12 years, and that's what they should do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I feel like Gary Numan is above that.
I think
above
so.
That kind of thing.
I think so. So finally, Todd, what do you rank as the better album of the 2? What do you sort of gravitate to? I
think that, and this may sound like a cop-out answer, but I think that Replicas may have higher highs, but overall, The Pleasure Principle is a better, more consistent album.
Yeah.
And it has a knockout rhythm section.
Oh,
I just love it.
Absolutely. I'm going to sit in the fence. Even Stephen, they're both equally genius. Yeah. I'm prone to making bold statements on my channel because I can and I will.
Right.
So, and I think genius and masterpiece is an overused word, and I don't use that all the time. But when you see how many bands and how much music that this guy has influenced, whether it was accidental or whether the planets all aligned, he's done it. And his music sounds relevant and current, and it's played to this day, whether through samples or the like. It's, he should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is a whole different topic.
I think so too.
But look at, I think that people that should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should be those that have influenced others and created subgenres. And this guy, okay, he only had 1 hit in the States, but you look at it in a worldwide basis, he's just so damn influential.
Yeah. And I keep going back to how I felt when I first heard it, but I'll never forget how I felt when I first heard him and saw him. And I thought, who is this guy?
Yes.
I don't know what this is, but I've never seen this before. Yeah. I've never heard this before.
Yes, and absolutely.
That has stuck with me and I'll never forget it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Todd. As always, you bring it home. It was just a pleasure to talk to you about the 2 Gary Numan albums. You can see Todd on Grant's Rock Warehouse, the Contrarians sometimes, Rushfans, a lot of different shows. I'll definitely have you back we'll do cover another couple of masterpieces and nuggets. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. And we'll catch you for a show real soon. Cheers.